Namaskar. Good morning, guys. Good morning, everyone. Rise and shine. It's the 7th of June. We have reached almost a quarter of June is complete. And so today we continue with the daily news analysis, the editorial edge series that StudyIQ IAS has come up with. Once again, I welcome each one of you who is watching me live and again who will be watching me through the course of the day and in the days to come. Today we have some important articles specifically from the mains perspective. Okay, so today we are going to look at the loss and damage concept in detail. Again, if you have been following the news, well, it was in the news recently at COP27 that was held in Sharm el Sheikh. Okay, so we will discuss what loss and damage is. Where is the origin of loss and damage? Hi, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome. So where is the origin of loss and damage and what does it exactly mean? What are the different connotations, So prima facie, you might think that it is to do just with an environmental problem. However, it's a lot more than that. Okay. Essentially, what you're looking at when you cover the loss and damage is environment, you're looking at finance, you're looking at human rights. So it's a linked topic. And one which it's best served for the student to understand thoroughly. Because again, the knowledge that you gain in these classes, in these newspaper analysis classes, good morning everyone, good morning, please welcome, you are welcome, all of you are welcome. So the knowledge that you gain, you are going to apply it, say not just in GS2-3 paper, whichever one the question is from, but you are going to also use it extensively in your essay paper, okay. If you have seen the essay paper that was asked in 2022 and 2021, you will see that the topics are not straightforward. Gone are the days when UPSC would give you a straightforward topic and you could write 1600 words at the blink of an eye, no issues, because you know everything about the topic. So gone are those days. Nowadays, a lot of cross-fertilization of ideas needs to be done. Okay. So understand it from that holistic perspective. Don't just look at loss and damage as an environmental problem. Obviously, it has to do with environment. No one is denying that. But then as a student, as someone who is going to write mains or is aspiring to write mains, you are essentially going to look at it in a holistic fashion. So that's going to be our first agenda for the day. We are going to discuss about loss and damage in detail. All right. And thereafter, we'll look at the electronic interlocking system. Okay. Recently in the news because of the unfortunate accident that happened in Odisha. So we will look at what electronic interlocking is. How is it different from Kavach? Okay, because there is a lot of confusion regarding interlocking and Kavach. There's a lot of difference in what signaling is, what transmission is. So obviously these are engineering terms, these are terms related to railway operations. However, as someone who is again preparing and eventually some of you might land up in say the railway management service, it's best advised that you know at least the basics of what exactly it means. Okay, so we'll discuss electronic interlocking versus the whole Kavach scenario. Just a comparative analysis, okay? Just to make sure that the basics are clear, the fundamentals are clear. And thereafter, I have a couple of MCQs for you. So we are going to look at those MCQs, two very interesting MCQs, because again, if you have seen the prelims paper or have appeared for this year's prelims paper, you will know that the options are changed. No more can you know one statement and arrive at the final answer. That luxury was awarded, given to previous generations or previous years of students, previous batches. So 2023 was, very, very surprising in that manner. No one expected that to happen. It happened. Many students were flummoxed straight away, and I would expect that to happen, okay, because you haven't prepared for it. Sometimes maybe one or two questions you might have done, but say to expect almost 90% of the paper in that particular fashion must have been a surprise. So it's best advise that you go ahead solving questions of both types, both the previous ones that used to be asked and the recent one that has been introduced, fortify your preparation in that manner. All right. So we'll look at those, the daily MCQs. And before I again move forward with the whole discussion today, just like I had announced in the previous class, this whole daily news analysis henceforth will be at 8 a.m. Obviously, this has been because some students made that request. So again, 8 a.m. is what we are looking at every morning from Monday to Saturday. And on Sundays, the news of Sundays, we'll do it on Monday morning itself. Okay? All right. So we'll get started with the first topic that I have for you. But before, obviously, like we do it, we always start with questions because it's going to be outcome-based learning. There's no point listening to a monologue here. Okay. So this is a question that was asked in 2021. Describe the major outcomes. You see how outcomes are important, guys? You can learn all the theory and everything, but then outcome-based learning is important, and similarly, outcome-based conferences are also important. Which is why the primary criticism, again, just to straight away start the conversation, the primary criticism against all of these COP 27, 28, 26, these numbers that they do now, most of the criticism is that, again, it is a talk shop. That outcome is not happening. It shouldn't take you so many iterations, versions to basically agree on something as fundamental as human survivability, which is essentially linked to the environment. Okay, so that's another criticism of this whole process, that the outcomes are far too slow and environment change is far too fast. Okay, but we'll come to that discussion in due course. So describe the major outcomes of the COP26. Okay. And what are the commitments made by India conference? So this is obviously in relation to 26. For those of you who have been following the news, you will know that COP27 was held recently at Sharm el-Sheikh. Okay, I think it was last year probably, in November, December, sometime around that. It was held in Sharm el-Sheikh, and one of the primary takeaways, okay, all said and done, the primary takeaway of COP27 was that there was some sort of consensus developing towards loss and damages. Okay, so that was the essential part that we need to understand before we go into the questions. That some sort of consensus was arrived at by the countries insofar as addressing loss and damage is concerned. Now, your first question will be, what is loss and damage? So we'll get to that. First, let's look at the questions now. Another is Green Climate Fund. Obviously, again, has been asked in the previous year questions of UPSC. Okay. So look at the questions, and if you know the answer, leave it for me in the comment box, the chat box. After we have discussed the whole theory, we will revisit these questions and have a look whether you are better able to solve these questions now. Have a look at the questions about the Green Climate Fund and which of the statements above are correct. Obviously, I have tweaked the options because no more should you be guessing. So either you know or you don't know. So you let me know. Okay. So these are the questions that we have, and let's straight away now jump into the discussion. So the article that I have for you is from the Hindu. Okay. The Hindu's article. Over-emitting nations owe India close to $1,500 per capita until 2050 as climate compensation. Now please understand this. Firstly, one concept that we're understanding here is climate compensation, which can also be understood as something called climate reparations. Okay. And this climate reparations, this climate compensation is essentially what? Some party will be giving money to some party for some wrong that has happened to the second party. Okay. So this climate reparations, this whole concept, is essentially linked to something that is, the larger term is called climate justice. Okay. So these are the two terms that you need to firstly be aware of. Climate justice is the bigger circle, okay, inside which one part of it is climate reparations or climate compensation. So what exactly is climate justice? Okay. What exactly is loss and damage? Again, very, very specific concepts, guys. They might look and seem the same, but then they are vastly different. So again, if you are asked this question in the UPSC, or if you want to talk about it in your answers, be very sure that you at least know what the specific meaning of each concept is. Okay, so we'll just quickly discuss it now. All right, so first let's look at climate compensation or climate reparations. Why exactly is compensation being demanded? So now, very logically, if you progress to understand this whole concept, it is to do with the fact that, say, the European nations, the Western nations. So if you look at human history, how it has evolved so far, you realize that industrial revolution, say, first came in the European countries. which gave them the means to essentially harness resources of the earth. Okay, they were able to extract things from the surface of the earth. They were able to extract from the sea, and all of that started there first. Okay, because they had industrial revolution. So one of the things that they started to extract was coal. Okay, so it has to essentially, you begin your whole answer, or you begin your understanding with the industrial revolution, and then you understand that all these rich countries started to extract coal and then started to burn it, because obviously it was fuel. They needed it to, say, drive other industries, their infrastructure products, all of that. Now, all of that essentially what happened? See how human history is evolved. After they had industrial revolution, suddenly you realize that, well, they have the power of resources. And so now they are going to further their political agenda. So colonialism, that we understand, was fueled by this whole process. That they had access to resources, which means better military might, better ships, better industry, better arms, better ammunitions. So colonial agenda was again furthered. So you had nations, say like in Asia, in Africa, all of these countries, they were now subjugated by the countries that had access to coal first, that they're able to harness coal first. Okay. So now after, say, you look at the hundreds of years since that has happened. Now obviously there's a huge disparity. Okay. Obviously some nations are better placed, some nations are not so better placed. One common link that you find is the nations that are better placed are the ones that harnessed directly the fruits of the Industrial Revolution. So now, in these years that they have had access to coal, they have burnt it en masse. If you look at the major polluters, carbon emission polluters, if you look at it, these are the developed nations. Okay. Even if you look at it per capita wise also, India is nowhere there. Obviously, we are far too much. The denominator is far too high anyways. So per capita emissions also, you find them leading. As a country emissions, well, again the European nations emit a lot. Now you probably have, say, China included, but then that has happened recently, say in the course of the last, say, 50, 60 odd years. But historically, China also was in pretty much the same situation as India up until just after independence. Okay. So now the problem arises that now suddenly that you have climate change and the effects of climate change being seen so easily, Unseasonal rains you have, unseasonal drought you have, monsoon gets affected, glaciers are melting, sea level is rising, all sorts of things are happening. And what eventually you find is that it is the developing nations, or say you call them the LDCs, okay? The developing nations, the ones that are still aspirational, the poor nations if you want to understand. So the primary thrust of climate change seems to be at the LDCs, also at the island states. Okay. You must have observed, say, during COP, say, the small tiny islands, Vanuatu or Reunion Islands or all of the Fiji, their forest ministers, environment ministers will be standing in the sea to give that message that, look, we are submerging and that the world should take note, world should do something about it. Why? Because they are directly in the line of fire. When sea level rise happens, it's going to be these islands that will go first. So what happens to the people of that area firstly? More importantly, what happens to the traditions, the rich culture, the flora, the fauna, all of that. So all of that is stake, It's very easy to say, disregard, say, okay, it's just one small island. But for some people, it's their home. Many people, in fact, it's their home. Imagine how would you feel if your home was to be compromised in, say, 20, 30, 40 years. You would want to get your message out very quickly. Help me out. Do something about it. This is why the island states take such drastic measures. Some people dismiss it as publicity stunt. It's not publicity stunt. They are trying to draw attention to themselves because in the larger context of climate justice, they are the ones who have to be first compensated. They are the ones who are going to lose their homes, say, in the next 20, 30, 40, 50 odd years. Okay. So these states are disproportionately affected. You look at it. Were these island states the ones that burned the coal? No. In fact, if you have followed this series recently, you will know that most of these island states are carbon negative. They have rich forests. So there is a lot of recycling happening. Okay. So they are carbon negative anyways. So they already have done what we should be doing or what our goal is. And yet, in spite of doing all that is correct, they are the ones who are going to lose their homes first. Okay. So now they have come up with this whole, in fact, all the developing countries, the LDCs plus the island states, all of them have come up and said, hey, the Western world should address this. Okay. You should address this in a holistic fashion. So what's the holistic fashion that you're looking at? Number one, obviously, monetary. There needs to be some sort of compensation provided to these individuals who are going to lose their homes. At the same time, it should not just be for, say, the historical part, but also to make sure that they survive as long and as far as possible. So you're looking at mitigation plus adaptation. Both have to be taken care of. All right. Mitigation plus adaptation. So now this is the primary crux, that these people have to be protected, their interests have to be served. So now let's go to understand this. Firstly, now that we have understood why climate reparations, why that demand is being put forward, so let's look at losses and damage now. So loss and damage refers to the negative consequence that arise from the unavoidable risks of climate change. Like I told you, the negative consequences. So you have, say, rising sea levels, heat waves, desertification, acidification of the sea, extreme events, all of this happening. Now imagine if there is a crop failure, just in India's context only. If there is a crop failure, so what should the whole concept be? Firstly, the state will step in to, say, support the farmers. Insurance will be, money will be distributed. MSP, if there is no crop only, then at least some sort of monetary benefit will be done, because obviously they are the backbone. Large number of people are employed there. Okay. Or if you have, say, suddenly rising sea levels, so at least a boundary, So you have, say, boundaries across the sea that you make, the walls that you construct. All of that are what? Adaptation. Making sure that, well, for the time being or in the future, you are able to respond to the changes that are happening as quickly and as far as possible. Okay. So adaptation again, say if you invest in, say, seed varieties that are, say, drought resistant or heat resistant, all of that are what? Adaptation measures. You are hoping to adapt to the climate change that's going to happen. So loss and damage is essentially to do with both of these. Then there is a historical concept also. Okay. What is the historical concept? I would suggest you take down notes, okay, individually, because then it will help you. So what is the historical context now? Like I told you, all of this is happening what? This was a power play, resources, coal burning, and then furthering the agenda of colonialism, human rights abuses. So there is a historical connotation also that, hey, well, all of this is not just to do with economy, all of this is not just to do with money, but it is also to do with addressing the strands of the society that you have weakened. Okay. So it's again a very holistic concept. Like I told you at the beginning of the class, never look at an issue just from the issue at the sector in which it belongs to, especially if you're looking to score very good in the mains. Okay. So includes not only economic damage to property, but also loss of livelihoods. Look at it now. You are going to lose your jobs, flora, fauna, gone. Okay. Cultures, gone. Imagine in the island state context only. In 20-30 years, all of this is gone. So what essentially the loss and damage fund does is, after you have understood what loss and damage fund does is essentially, it broadens the whole conversation, around climate justice. Okay. So now you might ask me how. How exactly does it broaden the whole conversation around climate justice? So look at it. Loss of what? Of culture. Okay. Of biodiversity. This is going to be lost. Damage of what? Of livelihood. Okay. Of lives. All of this. So this is essentially what the loss and damage fund is, and what it essentially goes to or seeks to address. Okay. Now that you have understood this, let's quickly go understand and look at some more facts for you. So historically, G20 countries have emitted majority of the greenhouse gases. Now that you have understood this, most of the developing countries are the ones, or developed countries are the ones that are responsible for the whole mass pollution of Earth that has happened. Okay. But then again, things are not so straightforward. So for example, the problem comes of attribution. What is attribution? Attribution is essentially when you pinpoint at someone, assign the blame to someone. So now this is the counter argument by the developed nations, the rich nations. The developed nations, their counter argument is essentially related to the problem of attribution. What they essentially say is, all the rich countries, they will say that, hey, hang on, we understand that the islands are sinking. We understand that all of this is happening. However, if there is going to be a monetary way forward for compensation, how are you going to pinpoint that, say, nation X is going to give this much money, or nation X is responsible? What scientific data is there? What empirical data is there to back that evidence? Which is again a fair question, but you can understand a sort of it's twisting the whole problem around. Okay, that asking for evidence is fine, but then asking for country-specific evidence, well, how do you figure out? Historically, how can you say that which country emitted how much amount of coal? Again, there was a lot of trading happening. Right now, we have, say, carbon credits and carbon market and this and that we have. All of these fancy terms have come up. But historically, none of this was there. So how are you going to assign that, okay, this particular country should pay 100 rupees to, say, climate compensation? You can't do that. So the problem is of attribution and essentially to do with lack of historical empirical research. Okay, because there is no research, and that is essentially to do with the whole fact that they have burnt massive amounts of coal. Colonialism now. Britain burnt India's coal to further Britain's interests. Okay, now they claim that, well, India should pay for it because it was Indian coal that we burnt. Indians will be like, hey, it was for your own political agenda. In fact, you mooched us and now you are asking us to pay also. What is this? So this is what the problem is. It's a convoluted problem. Attribution is not an easy solution because you do not have scientific research, and at the same time, there is no specific information also available. Okay? So look at it now. The African continent, for example, obviously, if you look at it, the whole history of colonialism, Indian subcontinent, African subcontinent, most affected. In fact, the worst affected in terms of just the pure loot that was done, in the name of colonialism and giving us civilization and all of that nonsense. It was unbridled loot. Okay. So the African continent, for example, obviously, it will contribute the least to climate change. Obviously. You look at the whole continent, it is right now coming up. This problem of malnutrition, there is no industry, most of it is forests or desert. So how are they going to anyways be polluting? Yes. So yet is the most vulnerable to its impacts. So you had, again, look at how world politics functions, guys. So there was a small, in fact, a major cyclone that hit the country of Mozambique. Okay, a country in Africa, African continent. It hits the whole country of Mozambique. Mozambique, again, one of the not so developing nations also. It's still considered to be an LDC. Income levels are low. Health, social indicators are low. So obviously, not a very well-to-do country. Now, they have a massive cyclone come and hit them. Okay, ravages the whole of Mozambique. Full destruction, damage, everything. And so, I'll not give you the numbers because numbers are not specific, but the whole idea you have to understand. So, Mozambique essentially suffered a loss of, say, 1,000 rupees, for example. So, they went to IMF, okay? They went to IMF and said, hey, we do not have the resources to rebuild again. Can you give us a loan? an interest-free loan, which we will use to rebuild our lives, because again, we have being subject to something that we didn't choose. The cyclone was not our doing. In return, the IMF says, wait, we will give you a loan, but then it will not be interest-free. Okay? You will have to pay back, and obviously, some terms and conditions, you are not going to get finance for free. So IMF came up with its own terms and conditions, as usual that they do. Restructure this, do that. All of that they tried to do with Mozambique. So the whole outcry at that time was, how fair is that? Okay? Are you like being serious with Mozambique right now? That you are asking them to agree to coercive contracts because you are IMF, because they do not have say in world power or world architecture. How fair is that? There was a huge outcry recently around, say, last year, October, November. I remember reading many articles about it. IMF was being like washed public, the left, right, center, it was going on for them. So eventually, after the public outcry, IMF said that, okay, we'll give you an interest-free loan. However, this is the bigger problem, guys. If today what is happening to Mozambique, or for example, even our neighboring country, Pakistan, you will know that they were ravaged by massive floods. 1/3 of Pakistan at one time was underwater. Imagine that. For a country, 33% of it was under floods right now. Completely destroyed by floods. So again, Pakistan said that, okay, give us some amount, $10 billion they wanted. Some amount, I forget the amount. So they wanted again some money. Okay. And then again the same. But then Pakistan problems are also different. It's also to do with financial reforms, structural reforms that they have to do, their political stability, all of that came in. But then the demand made by Pakistan that, hey, we need to be compensated. We had these flash floods come that killed whatever hope was there of revival of economy. Okay. At the same time, what IMF essentially was saying that you should not reroute these funds for debt servicing, because Pakistan is neck deep in debt, neck deep. They owe money from IMF to AIDB to Islamic Bank to China, like whichever person is there in the market, they owe money to everyone. So IMF's primary concern was that you should not use this money to service those debts. Instead, you should use it for only the damage-related part. No agreement was reached. It's still going to happen, or may happen, may not happen. I'm not aware of that. Okay. But then the larger concept is this, that nations are going to be facing with this problem. It's happened with Mozambique. It's happened with Pakistan. It is going to happen in the future coming days with many other nations. And so this demand is going to come up as to who is going to compensate these nations. Because the effects of climate change are being directly felt, the worst effects in fact, by countries in Africa, the island states, Indian subcontinent. And yet these countries are not the ones who had polluted the most in the first place. Okay. So, they contribute so little that they'll have to spend up to 5 times more, look at this, on adapting to climate crisis than on healthcare. This is also a problem. If you have to rebuild every time, the money that was there essentially for spending on your public is going to go down. You are going to spend less on education, less on health, less on welfare, less on insurance, all of that. Today, India is able to do all of this. Why? Because our, say, economy is robust. It's robust. Yes. We have, say, the financial ability to, say, give free ration post the COVID-19 pandemic. We have the financial ability to, say, give free vaccines. So all of that, essentially, this investing in the public only happens when the government has money to spare. Okay. But all of these nations, again, Mozambique, if they have 100 rupees in the bank, if a cyclone comes in, if they end up spending 70 on rebuilding, what the public is going to do with 30? What will they do? How will they survive? If IMF also says, oh, give us interest on that, so 15 rupees is going in the interest only. So what will they do with 15? This is the problem. That environment is not just, again, an environmental problem now. It's also become a finance problem. It's also become now a human problem. Because eventually, less money to invest in the public. So G20 countries, let me just clear this. So G20 countries, meanwhile, represent around 75% of global greenhouse emissions. 75% coming from these fellows, the G20. Okay. Historically, again, if you look at it, in G20 countries, you also have India. Okay. But then India's case is again very different. Okay. For example, our emissions, the nature of the emissions is very different from the emissions, say, in the Western world. Small example now. Okay. Our emissions, if someone is burning firewood, it is essentially to say keep themselves warm or cook food. Okay. So yes, pollution is happening, but it's necessary for sustenance of that individual until, say, LPG is reached or whatever technology can be reached to the person. Until that firewood is responsible for their sustenance. Whereas in the Western world, you have these people fly to Davos on say these high emitting jet airplanes to discuss climate sustainability. The irony of that. Okay. So what is luxury for them? The carbon emissions is leading to luxury for them. The carbon emissions by us is leading to us are just making sure that we stay alive. So the nature of emissions is different. How can you compare that? Okay. Again, India's historical injustice claims also stand true to that. We have just gotten free 75 years ago almost. Okay. Before that, our resources were taken away. It was open loot. We have a population of 140 crore. Our per capita emissions, one of the lowest in the world. All of this essentially say that in spite of the fact that India is a part of G20, okay, India's contribution to this pollution is minimal. Okay, to an extent, China's too. Obviously, right now you will see many lists say China is right at the top. Correct. Contemporary list does put them at the top because now they are an economic powerhouse. So they are burning left, right and center. But then look at 50 years, the stats before 50 years. Or if you look at the whole history, the timeline, and you draw a graph, you will see China is almost there at the bottom. India, it's not there in the list only because we have not been emitters at all. Okay, we are still learning. And in fact, now we are hoping to transition to net zero. So look at that. India would have never burned the amount of coal, say the countries in the European Union or all of these Western nations would have done. And yet, we have a population that we are managing to say provide services for. So look at the nature of emissions coming up, okay? Very inherently different nature. So Pakistan, you saw, 30 billion in damages, emits less than 1% of the global emissions. See? The neighboring country of Pakistan is a classic example of a valid case for loss and damage compensation. Okay, valid case, for sure. Mozambique, another example that you can quote. Valid case. Because they were not the ones who polluted in the first place. All right. So let's go forward. So now how has this concept evolved over time? Eventually, who came up with this idea? What was the whole process like? Let's also very quickly understand that. So the concept of loss and damage fund. First, you must be knowing UNFC framing in 1992, the Rio one. Okay, the Rio Convention that you know, the Rio Declaration also that you know. So, since then you have had good amount of debate happening on loss and damages. Okay, the least developed countries group has long aimed to establish accountability and compensation for loss and destruction. Obviously, the demand has to come from the LDCs because they have contributed next to nothing and yet they are having to face the most amount of climate change. And like you would expect, the so-called civilized nations have not really shown any sort of initiative or proactivity in this particular realm. None at all. Escaping accountability. Okay. So the first example that we know is the Warsaw International Mechanism on Loss and Damage. Okay. This was, I think, in 2013. Yes. The Warsaw International Mechanism, the first multilateral mechanism. Make a note of this again. The first multilateral sort of mechanism or agreement, you can say, after extensive pressure from the LDCs. Basically, they said that, okay, we will start to discuss on a formal manner at a multilateral forum. However, no funding mechanism, no guarantees were provided, essentially. Okay, we are going to discuss, but we are not going to discuss the funding mechanism and we are not going to guarantee anything. Let's just get a prima facie understanding of the problem is what this conference was. Warsaw International Mechanism on Loss and Damage. See, that's why I begin this whole discussion with that outcome-based action is missing. you should not be, it shouldn't be there that you have to agree to form a consensus, okay, we'll discuss after that. It doesn't happen like that. Considering the severity of environment change, now that you have the 1.5 degree centigrade threshold will be breached, the World Meteorological Organization saying that, I'm sure you must have heard of it. If not, well, my best suggestion would be that follow the daily news analysis. You will be updated with this. It will come to you like second nature. Okay. So if this is going to happen, and if we are still discussing about the modalities of L&D, we are still discussing about how L&D should look like, essentially the writing is on the wall. Okay. That a large segment of the world population is under direct threat and nothing has been done so far. There is no tangible action also. Okay. So COP27 now, going back to Sharm el-Sheikh, where they finally came up with some sort of agreement is what the newspapers will tell you. And yes, they are correct to the extent that it commits to a fund being created and leaves discussion for how it is to be set up, and most importantly, who will pay how much. Only saying that, okay, we are going to create a fund. This is like bureaucracy at its finest. You know, how to delay something to the maximum extent possible. The problem was not the creation of the fund. The problem right now is the disbursal of the fund. The problem is making sure that people have access to whatever fund is created. This is of urgent importance. However, what the people in Sharm el-Sheikh did was that, okay, we will just create a fund. And then they created something called a transitional committee. Okay. Make sure you note this. A transitional committee was created at COP27. And what was the job of this transitional committee? Like the name tells you, they have to prepare for transition. What will they prepare for transition of? Well, they are going to propose a way forward for all of this. How will this fund be set up? And how will money be eventually disbursed from this fund? The COP27 only guaranteeing that yes, a fund will be set up, but nothing else. No specific details provided by the COP27 meeting held at Sharm el-Sheikh. Okay, so let's go forward now. So why has it been so controversial? Like I told you, quickly understand this. So before you know it, COP28, where is it happening? Quickly guys, if any of you know this, please let me know in the chat box. Very quickly, it's happening in a couple of months' time, I think 3-4 months only. Where is it happening? Let me know in the chat box. COP27 happened at Sharm el-Sheikh. This is well known. Okay. Where is Sharm el-Sheikh? Let me know that too. But where is COP28 happening? More importantly, if you know, quickly type it. Okay. So why has loss and damage been so controversial? Why is it? Obviously, you can understand now the whole, now that I've painted the picture for you. If you are a Western nation, you will understand why you want to not pay loss and damages. Okay. So it has been controversial for a number of reasons. The main issues is that developed countries have been reluctant to provide adequate funding. Firstly, obviously, they are being miserly. Okay. They argue that they are disproportionately affected by climate change despite contributing least. Yes, the LDCs, this is the argument that we put, and that developed countries have a moral obligation. See, problem of ethics also now. Something that you should consider for the ethics paper also. Again, it's not just an environment problem, not just a finance problem, not just a human rights and dignity problem. It's also a problem of world ethics, global ethics in governance that you talk about. Okay. So, it's also a moral obligation to help them adapt and mitigate. Keywords, guys. Keywords if you want to include in your answer. That climate justice and all of that is to do with making sure that it's firstly a moral obligation. And what's the way you go forward? Twofold. One, adapt. Two, mitigate. Just giving compensation for the past is not important. You need to make sure that you are empowering people and communities to prepare for the future also. Okay. So adaptation and mitigation is the important word. The impacts of climate change. Developed countries often prioritize their own economic interests. Okay, which leads to tension and disagreement at climate talks. Why would they do this? Because the problem has not hit home. Okay. The day the problem hits home for these countries, then suddenly you will see a lot of urgency in action. As if you were to just draw a parallel as to how the Western world behaves, and if you follow Dr. S. Jaishankar's recent statements, you will also understand that terrorism was not a global problem until the Western world was safe from it. The moment they had a 9/11, suddenly it became a world problem. Same thing with climate change also. Right now, you have one Hurricane Katrina and eventually whole world is talking about it. The moment you start to have several of those hit in quick succession, okay, you will suddenly see that it'll take a lot of impetus. Yes, there was a recent cyclone that hit Guam also, a level 5 hurricane. Okay, so it's not that change is not happening in that part of the world, or it's not that these countries are completely safe from the effects of climate change. The day it hits the home for them, you will see a lot of action happening. Right now, the focus of climate change, unfortunately, is on the poor countries, the island states, subcontinents, African continent. Okay. Now, another issue. Make a note of this slide. In fact, it's a very important slide because it gives you the analysis that you want, the answer writing, the points for the answer are included in this slide. Okay. Good. COP28 in Dubai, COP27 Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. Absolutely. And so can you for a moment just quickly appreciate that COP28 happening in Dubai? Okay. Oil-rich nation hosting climate talks. Can someone see the irony in that? Yes. So again, we'll see what decisions and what outcomes it comes. But prima facie, one is little circumspect of this whole hosting the global talks on climate sustainability and for the ways ahead, and you're hosting it in one of the primary fuel producing countries in the world. So again, it's an ironical situation, but we'll see. All right. So another issue with loss and damage fund is the lack of clarity. So you do not know, like I told you, scope and purpose is not known, just fund creation is known. How will the fund be distributed? How much will the fund be? None of that we know. Some countries have argued that the fund should only be used to address loss and damage that cannot be prevented through adaptation or mitigation measures. Look at this now. This is another counter argument that is being put forward by the developed, the rich nations. Okay. That let's address loss and damage which is unpreventable, that it suddenly happens and there's nothing you can do. So we'll just do that. Others argue that the fund should also address loss and damage that result from historical emissions and failure of developed countries. There is a historical context, like I'm telling you. It's not just to do with a cyclone hitting you and then the Western world giving you donation to go rebuild your country. No. It is to do with this historical injustice, that there is an inherent mismatch, that we had access to resources later. You had access to resources earlier. You were able to build your economy. You were able to further your political agenda. We were the ones who were colonized. You were the colonizers. And so you should pay for that historical injustice too, historical emissions too. Okay. Which is a fair argument. Now, you can take either side, guys. Okay. Not necessary that you have to agree to the second article. If you agree to, say, the European point of view, fine. But then what claims would you justify? The only claim, the only standable claim that they have is of attribution. That yes, you may not be able to scientifically pinpoint at a particular country and say, you know what, this country was 50% guilty, the other country was 50% guilty. This is the only claim or the only standpoint of the European nations. Okay. So again, let me know in the answer box, what's your assessment? Because again, it's a very convoluted problem and something that UPSC can ask and twist and turn in 100 ways, especially if it's an analysis based question. No, the kind of contours that you can cover in this answer, it's amazing. A well thought out answer in 250 words will not just look at it again from a singular perspective, but a multi-perspective approach, which is what I'm trying to provide you in this daily news analysis. Okay. So it should take care of the historical emissions and the failure of these rich nations to address climate change in the past. Very important slide. Again, please make sure that you take note of this. Okay. There's a lot of fodder material, especially from the mains perspective. All right. Now that this has been done, what's the way ahead? Finally, what should be done in Dubai? COP28 to be held in Dubai, Coder and Nalajana. Good answers, guys. So, COP28. What is to be done in Dubai? Firstly, a decision will need to be made on the structure of the fund. Okay, fund creation has been done in COP27. Now we are looking at the structure plus the disbursal method, the distribution method. So, it talks about the structure. The structure of the fund, which includes options. Now, please understand these three words, guys. Very, very important. So, will it be a gap fund, a catalytic fund, or a mixed model? Good answers will include this. Please make a note of these three types: gap fund, catalytic fund, mixed model. Okay. So, now what exactly is a gap fund? Okay. It's designed to provide financing for projects that cannot be funded through traditional financing mechanisms. Catalytic fund, mobilizing additional financing from other sources such as private investors. Okay. So, catalytic will have private investors. Gap fund, where you do not have from the traditional methods, say the IMF, the World Bank, the AIIB, or all of that banks, if they cannot provide funds or if they are unable to cover that particular sector, a gap fund could be created. Okay. And providing seed funding, fine. Now, the World Bank's City Climate Gap Fund. Quote this example. For example, if the World Bank's City Climate Gap Fund uses its resources to address the gap in urban climate finance through financing project preparation and capacity building. Sectoral funds need to be created. Best example to understand this, how in banks, you have different type of banks that address different niche sectors. Yes. So, you have payments bank and this bank and that bank. Some banks are good in rural, some banks are better in urban, some banks are better targeted at women. Similarly, on that model, you can't just have one institution that will act as the big boss and then allocate money. You have to go with a begging bowl. No. You need to have a financing model that is sectoral in approach and specifically multi-sectoral in approach. Okay. So, the funding mechanism has to be multi-sectoral. It can't be that one size fits all policy. Okay. The Asian Development Bank's ASEAN Catalytic Green Finance Facility is an example of catalytic fund because it uses its financing to de-risk green infrastructure projects and attract more private capital. Adaptation plus mitigation, both has to be taken care of. Okay. So, these are the three types of funds that you're looking at: gap fund, catalytic fund, a mixed model. Okay. So, this is what the COP28 should ideally take care of, look like. It should at least seek to address this issue ASAP. Okay. Yes, Nalajana, I agree. And that is why I'm telling the irony of COP28 in Dubai. But we'll see. I don't want to draw any preconceived notions. Hopefully, the nations will go in with a lot of sincerity to address what is potentially a defining moment. Okay. The writing is on the wall now. If you don't change now, things will be irreversibly changed. Our future generations will curse us if we continue the way we are doing. Okay. But we'll see. All right. So, this is again, look at this. Can't this just be a question of mains in isolation? Huh? If it just needs to be written word here, analyze. Simple. A question of means in isolation. Loss and damage is intrinsically linked to adaptation. This question is perfect for, say, a 250 word answer. Because again, you have to talk about adaptation, you have to talk about loss, you have to talk about damage, and you have to talk about the link. Historical link, environmental link, financial link, all of that. Okay. So, increased adaptation leads to less loss and damage, and similarly, responses to loss and damage that increase adaptive capacity will help avoid future loss and damage. You have to make sure that you make people have the capacity, build some capacity for them to deal with the effects of climate change that are happening today and that will happen tomorrow and in the future. Okay. So, you need to do that. Unless and until you do that, just giving money, saying, okay, here take compensation, how long and how sustainable is it? You also realize this, Eventually, people have to be fortified. People need to be given the resources to tackle it head on. You can't have this financing model that will work seamlessly everywhere. It can't happen. It's an idea good for paper only. Okay. So which is why adaptation is of primary importance. Not just the past, look at the future also. Okay. So adaptation, averting and minimizing loss and damage, is indeed distinct from addressing loss and damage. Solutions to address must also ensure a resilient future, like I told you. If you just focus on mitigation, okay, if you just focus on mitigation, well, it's incomplete. If you just focus on adaptation, again incomplete. You basically need to marry these two. These two need to be married. And then you need to draw a strategy wherein communities are empowered. Okay? You have to give strength to the people first. All right? Okay. So with that, we come to the end of the first topic for the day. With that, we come to the end of the first topic for the day. Here is my official Telegram ID. If you're enjoying this discussion, if you're liking this analysis, well, it's been started very recently, just yesterday. And so we have, in fact, some members there. I hope to make it a lot more active. There will be a lot of question sharing, analysis sharing that will be happening from this Sunday onwards. So if you're liking this, well, I can only request you, please leave me a like and a comment. And do consider joining this Telegram group, as we discuss a lot of current affairs. Okay. If you look at the StudyIQ IAS English channel, what you will find is that we have individuals, dedicated individuals, who are essentially going ahead with this whole knowledge sharing, and making sure that concepts are easy for students to analyze and remember. And so if you're liking this, do consider subscribing and share it among your friends and family too. All right? Okay. Just give me a second. I'll have some water and then we begin with the next one. All right. Let's look at the second topic that I have for you, the electronic interlocking system, obviously to do with the recent tragic events that unfolded in Odisha. Okay. So quickly we'll understand what electronic interlocking is, so that we are able to better make sense of the unfortunate accident that happened. Okay. So electronic interlocking refers to a mechanism that controls the movement of trains to ensure trains move safely through a controlled area. So you have tracks that okay, you have tracks, and then you have, say, if this is the primary track, then you have another track that goes towards the left. It's called the loop line. If you have seen the video that I had done on the Coromandel incident, you will know what a loop line is. I had discussed that in detail. So this point of transition, whether a train will continue on the main track or go on the loop line, well, it's a lot to do with understanding interlocking first. Okay. So an arrangement of signals, let's have a quick understanding of this. Arrangement of signals and points which may be interconnected mechanically or electrically. Both ways. You have mechanical points also that will make sure that a particular track merges into the other one, connects to the loop line, or it doesn't. Or it can be done through the electronic system also. Hi, welcome, Pili. How are you? Which operates so that a train can move from one track or a junction to other to safety without coming in the way of other trains. So essentially, if this is a track, this is a loop line, okay, electronic interlocking will make sure that either the train moves here or the train moves here, depending on the type of locking that has been done here. Advanced signaling, computer-based system that uses electronic components. Okay. So obviously you have interlocking that can be done both mechanically and electrically. So electronic interlocking, electrically. It ensures that the train gets a go-ahead only when the route ahead is clear. The system is alternative to the conventional relay interlocking system. Okay. And well, obviously we have a lot of 50% of India's Indian Railways coverage uses this mechanism, this computer-based mechanism, to make sure that whether a train goes on one line or it goes into the other line. Or you could do this mechanically also. So you must have seen, say, if you probably go towards the rural parts of your state, okay, you will find that the railwaymen, the gangmen that are there, they will do something like this, pull a lever before the train is to come, and after the train passes, then they'll pull it back again. So it is essentially to determine which track the train moves on. That whole relay thing can also be done in an electronic fashion. So now, three things that we quickly need to understand here. One is signal, then we have point, and then we have track circuit. Just keep an idea of it, okay? You don't need to really understand it from the technical perspective, but have a fair idea of what happened and what are the key facets involved. Because again, as a UPSC aspirant, what it asks you is to be aware. So that awareness has to be built through these kind of information. So signal, based on the status of the track ahead, signals are used to tell a train to stop, proceed, or exercise caution. Similar to how we use, no difference there. Point, a train can change its track using a point. Main line, loop line. This becomes a point. Okay. These are movable sections of a track which guide the wheels towards the either straight or diverging tracks. Points are operated using switches. So if a train has to change lines, the switch point is activated and then it goes in the loop line. Okay, not very difficult to understand so far. But now we understand track circuits. So track circuits are electrical circuits to detect the presence of a vehicle or a train on its track. So what essentially the circuits do is to verify whether the route is clear or preoccupied. Okay. So now when you know and understand all of these three things, that it is to do with signals, it is to do with point, and it is to do with circuits. These three things together will make sure whether a train is moving straight or is moving towards a loop line or some other line. Right? Now that we have understood, these are the fundamentals of the process. Two information points form the basis of the EI signal system. This is important, guys. So please have a look. If you followed the railway board member's interview that happened soon after the accident, you must have seen how she comprehensively explained what an electronic interlocking system was, what work it does. There was a lot of video explanation. If you have not seen that, well, no problem. So you are understanding the theory behind it. But have a look at the video too. It'll crystallize the whole thing for you. Okay. So a signal to pass is given based first on which direction the track is set, and second, whether the divergent track is free of obstruction. Okay. The EI system then directs the train to an empty track where two tracks meet, and circuit prevents another train from running on that block. Essentially, if you have a track, the driver is going to get the information first through these relay circuits that, well, okay, there is an obstacle ahead, or there is that track is occupied, which is why now he is being routed towards the other track. Okay. Obviously, the driver also sees the signaling system. He will know if it's red, yellow, green. He will know what to do. But his movement is essentially guided by the electronic interlocking system. So now it's completely different from Kavach. You must have understood by now. Electronic interlocking system is not in the hands of the driver. It is being done by the station master or his representative, whoever is working on the ground, the railway personnel. And computer is essentially determining whether the train goes straight, or the train goes left, or the train goes right, depending on the type of circuits that have been set. Okay. So when this is clear now, this is possibly the reason now being attributed to the Coromandel Express tragedy. That there was a problem with the interlocking system. That in spite of the train running at high speed and a loop line, so what the problem of Coromandel Express was, if you quickly understand it in one line, is that this was the route the Coromandel Express was supposed to take. There was a goods train here. For some reason, this goes here. So problem with the interlocking system here, the point that we spoke about. Okay, the point part of the electronic interlocking system. So obviously the driver, it's not in his hands whether he goes here or he goes here. It's not like our driving, no, that suddenly you take left, suddenly you take right. his movement is determined by the circuits or by the railwaymen or women, whoever are working on the ground. So once this malfunction, the driver of Coromandel traveling at 128 kilometers per hour goes to the loop line and hits the goods train. Thereafter, you have another train coming from that side. Again, that one, the circuits didn't fail. It continued to go on the straight line until this derailed train hit the oncoming train. So the problem of electronic interlocking is possibly the one that could have led to the Coromandel Express tragedy. But now that we have understood EIE system, electronic interlocking, let's quickly have a look at this particular. Yeah, Kavach. So now Kavach is completely different again. Electronic system is, interlocking system is to do with the direction of the train. Kavach is to do with having a minimum distance between two trains, an anti-collision system of sorts, if you have to understand it. That if two trains have Kavach installed, okay, in spite of the fact that a driver may make a human error, he may misread the signal or he may overspeed, in spite of that, the train will come to a halt. Now please realize these trains are going at massive momentum, 128 kilometers per hour with some 20 odd bogies. So for even to stop, to come to a complete halt, it's going to require a few kilometers at least a kilometer minimum. Okay, I'm sure a lot more than a kilometer. So please take into account that it's going forward with a lot of momentum. It's not something like us that the train has ABS system involved, so you brake and it comes to a halt. No. So Kavach is essentially, the requirement can only be fulfilled for Kavach if you have a 1 kilometer distance between the two trains. Okay. So prevention of signal passing at danger. What is signal passing at danger? That if the signal is red, the driver does not pay attention or mistakes it for something, or something happens. And if he passes the signal with his train when the signal is red, Kavach activates, the train stops. Okay. Similarly, it gives update of movement authority, automatic braking for overspeeding. So the driver falls asleep, and you know that railway tracks, or if you do not know, I'm telling you, railway tracks have segments that have particular speed limits. So they have a high speed segment, a medium speed segment, a low speed segment. So suppose if you are the train driver, if you are driving the train, in a high speed segment, you go at the right speed. Suddenly you come to a medium speed segment, you are still going at the high speed. So Kavach activated, the train stops. So Kavach is an anti-collision device. Electronic interlocking is basically to do with the direction the train is traveling in. Now, one small concept before I let you go is this particular concept. Let me just get to it. One more thing that you quickly need to understand is the fail-safe mechanism, guys. Okay, I don't think I've written it. I'll just write this down for you. The fail-safe mechanism, what does it mean? Okay, so the fail-safe mechanism is employed by the Indian Railways, which essentially says that even if one particular portion of this whole signal or point or circuit, okay, the interlocking system is made of these three things, even if one fails, okay, even if there is problem with one, straight away the system, the computer system is so designed that, well, the train will come to a halt, red signal will be shown. It will always err on the side of caution. So even if it fails, the natural tendency of the system is to straight away go towards making sure that there is no particular mishap. Okay, so that's essentially a fail-safe mechanism that you're talking about, which essentially the Indian Railways, all systems of Indian Railways are designed to include the fail-safe mechanism. All right, good morning everyone. Good morning, welcome. You guys are a bit late, but please make sure that you go through the whole discussion, the whole lecture, okay? Because today's lecture is important in terms of understanding the end-to-end concept of loss and damage. All right? Okay. So now that you've understood the fail-safe mechanism, here is it, guys. Two questions that I have for you. Okay. Number one, Amrit Dharohar and Mishti. Okay. So this is to do with Mishti and Amrit Dharohar. which of the above are incorrectly matched, please let me know in the chat box, the comment box. Okay, let me know the answer to both the questions in the comment box. We will be discussing the answers to this in the subsequent lecture tomorrow. And also find out which of the following countries was the first to comprehensively address loss and damage as part of their national climate plan. A small hint for you, today's lecture I spoke extensively on island states. Okay, I spoke extensively on island states and how their environment ministers would stand in the sea, try to get attention of the whole world. Here is the hint for you to solve this question. Okay, the first, in fact, country, the first state to come up with this whole loss and damage concept, and a workable concept, in fact. Okay, so if you want to do some further reading on loss and damage concept, first find the answer to this question, and second, go ahead and read what that country has done in terms of loss and damage. Exceptional example. All right. Timing of the class, once again. Okay, firstly, now that the class is done, please do leave me the answers for these two classes, guys. And so I'll just take 2 minutes before I let you go. First things first, the timing of the class has been altered. Every morning, we start at 8 a.m. sharp. Okay, I don't make it 8:01, 8:02, 8 a.m. dot we will start. Okay, yes, Nalajana, that was the problem, in fact, that the signal was green. There was some problem with the electronic interlocking, but again, we shouldn't speculate. You know, human lives have been lost, and so we'll wait for the inquiry report to come and then probably learn from there. But okay, 8 a.m. is the class that we start sharp. 2 to 3 articles, multiple MCQs, at the same time a thorough analysis of the topic. I just don't want to read a particular article and then say, okay, this is, no. You have to understand the whole story around that particular topic. That's what my focus is. Again, before I let you go, if you have not already, well, please go ahead and make sure that you are part of this particular Telegram channel, wherein I will be keeping you updated with all the videos, all the content that I create. If you do like my analysis, if you do like this daily newspaper class, please do consider being a part of this Telegram channel. And finally, before I end this class and let you go, my dear students, given that this year's CSAT paper was very difficult, to say the least, okay, very, very difficult. And so, if you have followed my reading comprehension classes, you will know that a lot of scientific approach is needed to essentially look at the RC passages. In fact, the students who were with me during the reading comprehension series, well, some of them have reached out to me and they did benefit from that. In fact, most of them are scoring in excess of 80-85 in the paper. So, if you are looking at making sure that your CSAT is fortified, StudyIQ IAS has launched this special live batch series, 100 classes, and the entirety of CSAT will be done for you. And I will be handling the reading comprehension bit. If you would like to see how I teach, if you would like to have a demo class of sorts, well, what you can do is, number one, go ahead to the StudyIQ channel, and wherein I have discussed on the evening of CSAT, okay, I discussed the whole solutions, okay, and well, it was liked. Last I checked, it had crossed 1 lakh views, so have a look at that particular class. Or if you want, go to the StudyIQ English channel, wherein you will find the reading comprehension series that I had done prior to CSAT, and have a look at the classes. If you like the way I present, you are most welcome to join. Try using this code and you will be allotted my class. And with that, my dear students, without wasting any much of your time, make sure that you pay attention to the loss and damage concept, an extremely intricate and exceptionally important concept. Okay, so give it the attention that it deserves. Until I see you tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. on this very channel. Before you go, make sure you like and subscribe, and please do leave me a comment. It really encourages me and appreciates me to do all the hard work that I do for you. Thank you for joining. Have a good day.